Welcome to One Word Stories. My name is Joanna Zell, and I'm really happy to host a very special guest of mine, Sue Shinomiya. Sue is the founder of Global Business Passport, author of the book Business Passport to Japan, and actually with her really vast experience of living in the Silicon Valley, first of all, in Japan later on, right now in Portland, she is the person to go when we talk about not only intercultural differences and similarities, but above all, how we can actually work with storytelling practices in completely different contexts. As for this completely different context, currently we've got this dominant narrative that leaders, decision makers, they need much more story listening skills. That storytelling is just one part, however, story listening is extremely important. So, Sue, what can we learn from Japan in terms of story listening?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, Joanna. I am very pleased to be here and to be talking with you today. It seems that the idea of story listening is something all of us, not just for business leaders, not just for leaders, but also those of us who are trying to follow all of the narratives, if I may use that word, that are going on around the world. And what can we learn? When I think about Japanese approach to storytelling, and particularly around listening, I think of this concept of ma, which could be translated as silence. It could be translated as emptiness. And from a English, my sort of Western American centric viewpoint, sounds kind of dead space or emptiness. But what is missed in that interpretation is how very rich Ma is. Ma is the pause that we need, the silent thinking time that we need after listening to somebody ask a question or after listening to somebody make a statement. We need that moment to gather our thinking, to think, what is my best response to this? And then make that response. And Ma goes beyond just the silence in the room. It's a way of creating space between things. I think I first learned about Ma when I was studying the art of Japanese flower arrangement called ikebana. And I don't know if you've ever heard of that or seen that, but ikebana is it's a beautiful way to bring nature into your home, if you will. And I took this course from this very dignified and very well-known sensei, an elder in Japan, and it was all in Japanese, of course. And I had all these beautiful flowers in this vase and this frog with, meaning the little thing with that sticks up so you can stick the flowers in it. And I thought, oh, beautiful! I'm going to put all of these flowers into this vase. And the vase is, of course, flat, so all the flowers kind of spread out. It was beautiful. And the sensei came over to my beautiful arrangement and started doing this, taking all the flowers out, and told me very gently, Sue, Susan, it is not the flowers that are important. It is the space in between the flowers that is the most important. That gave me pause and made me understand so many things about the fullness of the spaces in between. When I work with clients who are global, for example, I often hear this, kind of complaint, if you will, about their Japanese colleagues don't speak up enough, or they seem to be quiet. Are they shy? All of these negative interpretations. And when I talk to my Japanese clients and my Japanese students and so on, they are complaining about there is no ma in
Mhm.
this environment. I don't have the space to think and to give a good answer. Nobody gives me a chance, and they do get marginalized without even knowing it. So training, do I train the people who are having to get into the conversation and have to reshape the way that they have been brought up to believe is a good way to listen? Or do I have to look to the other side and say, no, can we just include even a moment of pause?
Mhm.
Both are very hard to do if you have been trained from the beginning, from your childhood, to either jump in and be heard and stand up and don't let any space happen in the conversation, or you've been brought up to hold back and to allow the flow, to have pause and silence and to listen. And the I don't if you've seen a character, the Chinese character for listen, it includes many components that are not just about opening your ears, but opening your heart and listening with your full self.
Yeah. It's like the thing, isn't it?
Ting, which is the Chinese original character for it, and it's the same in Japan. Well, they use that for special cases in Japanese as well. So yeah,
How do they call it?
in Japanese, well, there's several different words that can be used for listening. I like to use the words that mean space, like ma, and also there's a word ba, which is the place. It's the place, but it's also the context
Yeah.
of the communication that creates meaning, that allows for meaning, that allows for new experiences to happen or not. So when you're listening, or when you're setting up a meeting, or you're setting up a situation for Japanese and to have exchange, you would want to consider the ba, the place, the context. Is it comfortable for everybody? Is there good, there's another word, fuinki, which is atmosphere. Is the atmosphere conducive to good relationships? It's not easy in this virtual world, I must say. And another interesting phenomenon that I've heard and seen happening is in a Zoom call, for example. You might have your room full of people from different countries and so on. And the folks who are in Japan will have their cameras turned off. What's up with that? There's also this sense of privacy that happens in the virtual setting. And the preference is to not have my face on the screen
Mhm.
for many Japanese. And I'm still trying to examine this phenomenon and find out, is there some uh, how to either encourage the cameras to come on, or how to create an environment of empathy that not everybody prefers to have their cameras on. And it's very difficult when we don't have the choice to be face to face in the same room.
Yeah,
The other
it's very
concept that's
interesting.
interesting is wa. So I'll get into that next. But yes, go ahead. What is your
Yeah,
question?
it's it's just so the last sentence that resonates with me a lot because I remember reading the book The Japanese Mind, and there was a fantastic chapter regarding this discrepancy between, on one hand side, dealing with the, let's say, proximity in the public sphere and home, and these are two different worlds because they gave the example of architecture that when there are some houses with gardens around, there is a huge wall separating them from the outside world, and this is how we can imagine also this need to be separated from the audience, not to and not to let the public enter this sacred space, so to say. However, in the house itself, there are very thin walls that are moving, and you can, of course, change the space depending on the situation, on the context, and there is almost no privacy.
Yes. Yes. The the concept we're looking for, if I can include that too, is sort of outside world, inside world, or uh, outside world being soto and inside world being uchi. And uchi is also the word for home,
Mhm.
interestingly. And of course, in 2022, there are no walls around Japanese homes, but there is a sense of entry
Yeah.
when you go to a Japanese home. And there's some time that you take either to go up in the elevator, to walk into if it's a yard, or into a house. And then there's the neutral zone called the genkan, which is what we would call an entryway. But for Japanese, it's not really the outside or the inside, because that's where you take your shoes off.
Yeah.
And then you would, in most traditional Japanese homes, you would step up and into the home, and that's part of getting the uchi in the inner. And then one more step into the tatami area with the bamboo mattings, that's even more uchi. And then you would take off your slippers even for that room. And I learned this the hard way the first time I went to Japan with a homestay family. And I was just sort of walking around like, no, take your shoes off here. I'm like, okay, thought I had that done. And then, no, take your slippers off for this room. And then I went into the bathroom, into the toilet area. And then there was a whole other set of slippers for there. And I didn't understand how to use the Japanese toilet, but I was kind of confused, but I managed that. And I walked out of there with the toilet slippers on my feet, which are not supposed to go out of the toilet room. All of these sense of boundaries, but no set boundaries. And there's a permeableness to the very inner part of it, but a kind of, as you say, more of a, it's a permeable wall, but there's a definite wall between inner and outer.
Yeah.
That, and I think it exists in the mindset for many Japanese. And you're right that might have some feeling of, if I'm on a video camera and it's in my house, that's too private.
Yeah.
If I'm in my office, no problem.
Yeah. Because it's the public sphere anyway.
Right. Yeah. Sense of private and public self is quite defined. I look at it, you've heard the coconut analogies, you've heard the peach analogies for, is it a permeable culture? Do you talk a lot about personal things, or do you have like a wall until you have, proper introduction? I see Japan is different. It's more like, layers of an onion.
Yeah.
And you have inside to outside, going to inside. There's a good chance you can get inside. It takes time and patience and relationship building, ningen kankei. And once you do, you can have a very close relationship.
Yeah. So back to our ideas regarding silence and what can we learn from Japanese. You have mentioned not only in the context of silence, but also the space. There's two magic words, ma and ba. What about other examples?
Well, talking about Japanese culture and ba and ma, it's hard to talk about Japan without thinking about wa.
Oh, yeah.
And I think wa, which we translate as harmony. Harmony, of course, in our Western mind, whatever, it doesn't quite cover the full rich meaning of it. I also talk about it as appearance of harmony, because people fight with each other in every culture. It's do you pick a different pick a different place to go and have your face-to-face confrontation? How do you manage that? How do you navigate that? But wa is a kind of, it's actually something in the air almost. Some of them come out of Confucius or Shintoism, which is the indigenous religion in Japan. And some of the terms come out of Buddhism. And for harmony, it's that awareness of intercultural connection, actually. So wa is in the air, in a sense. And you're kind of gauging what's going on in the air around me, and how are people interacting, and how do I adjust and fit in that situation. I don't want to be the one who sticks out and makes a complaint or has an opposite opinion necessarily. I can find a way to do that, but I may not want to have it in this situation with facing other people. I might want to have that offline. So there are definitely mechanisms to get at that. And all of these mechanisms allow, for example, the ma time allows for opposite opinions to occur, but not necessarily, fighting against one and the other. It's like, okay, we're going to have some silence here and consider the context, and then consider how do we create a harmonizing effect. So these are, again, some really interesting ways to look at it. And that listening, of course, listening with your full mind, because this is the kind of mythology. The Japanese never say no. That's actually not at all true. There are 1,000 different ways that you might say no. And for a Japanese to Japanese, it's loud and clear. Maybe it's a gesture like maybe, or maybe it's a wording like, this is very difficult, or I will consider it. These may mean no and be loud and clear in a high context culture, but it feels like they're not making up their minds. They're not saying yes, they're saying yes when they mean no. And it's, again, contextual. It feels like that from the Japanese heart that, it's pretty clear that I'm not happy with this, but you don't see it. If you might miss it if you're not listening fully, like listening to the body language, listening to the context, listening to what happened the last time, listening to what's the relationship that we have, how is the relationship going, how are we nurturing that and building that. So it's I think something that there's a lot that can be learned from considering how we listen with silence,
Hmm.
not listening for my next opportunity to speak up.
Exactly, not listening to react, not listening
Hmm.
to immediately judge. Yes, no, 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 you are
Right,
wrong. I have
right, right.
1,000 arguments that are just the opposite,
Yes,
but really
yeah.
listening with the intention. So, this intentional listening to
Mhm.
understand.
Yes. And storytelling is a really interesting and important part of, of course, of every culture. But I think the way it's used in Japan also is because you don't want to have a face-to-face, kind of contentious relationship, because there's that discomfort with the dissonance and disharmony,
Yeah.
that people might use a story as a way to get at the disagreement.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for sharing. It's fascinating what you are sharing here. It brings me actually to one more question. What are the differences you see in the readiness regarding telling stories? Because we have been talking so much about, the privacy issue, and
Hmm.
this is actually a big, big theme also in the leadership context. How
Hmm.
much should, can, needs to be revealed
Mm.
in the professional context so that people have got the chance to get to know the leader better way, that they
Hmm.
trust this person. What about really this readiness to share stories in cultures that are close to your heart?
Ah, that's a wonderful question about the readiness to tell a story, or to be what we might consider to be open or vulnerable. There are examples of this, and there's also the opposite of this, because there is that desire to have a little bit more space, and to have a place to feel more open and vulnerable. And if your training or teaching has been that the public space or the work environment is not the place to express your personal
Mm,
life, and your personality, and your stories about yourself personally, then it can be very difficult to switch styles from that.
yeah.
If, for example, in Japanese culture. On the other hand, there has always been a understanding that human relationship, ningen kankei, is that's kind of their currency, if you will.
Mm,
Human relationship, building good human relationships, is what helps to make even a business situation flow, or a academic situation flow. People need to know they can trust you, and need to know that they have a connection with you, that's not just because of your place in this role, or your you are my boss and I am your subordinate. It's more comfortable if there is some sense of a relationship. So how does that work in a global situation? What I'm finding is that there are, as with any population or culture, there is diversity within a culture. And
mm,
there are many leaders, for example, coming from Japan, who are now in charge of these global and big joint venture companies, and they're building a plant in some other part of the world. And they want to be seen as somebody who is a part of the new culture that they're in. If they
yeah.
come to the US, these Japanese say, don't look at me as some strange and alien Japanese. Look at me as somebody who is on your side, on your same side, and part of your team. And on the one hand, you want them to understand that their culture is respected by the new culture, and I want to bring that aspect to it, and have a team that works and appreciates and respects each other, and allows inclusion, allows for a sense of belonging. And on the other hand, I want to respect this individual leader's sense that, don't treat me any differently
Yeah.
than you would another leader. And I often have wondered about that. It's like, are you trying to adjust to fit in, which is the kind of Japanese gut feeling? Or is this your authentic self coming out in this other culture?
Mm.
I think that's a question we always should be looking at leaders of global entities.
Yeah.
As maybe their true culture wasn't really the one that they grew up in, it's this new one. Or maybe they have an integrated whole
Yeah.
of many cultures, and they don't disconnect, or they don't discount the other culture. They bring their full self into their leadership role.
Mm. Yeah. So that they really integrate all these influences and feel comfortable in this cultural context. Hmm.
That bringing that harmonizing
Exactly.
of disparate and differences
Yeah.
in a way that will create something better. And I think that's the other piece that's missing, that I wanted to also talk about, is all of these, creating a good place or ba, and having that ma, and the harmonizing is so that you can create something more, or be more creative, or have something better happen. It was out of this sense of these factors that you could create something like a Prius, a hybrid car. Nobody had really done that before. And or
Mm.
to create some new technology, that leaving that space for something new to happen is definitely an important piece of it.
Mm. Yeah. When you address it, and when I also think of the word innovation in general, this almost 3 years of pandemics, of course, costed all of us lots of energy, lots of stress. And
Mm.
still, there were moments of not only despair, but also spaces where people improvise, when people were really innovative. And actually, accordingly to different studies, we have accelerated the digitalization by a couple of years just because we got stuck. This is actually the question I ask all my guests regarding the pandemics. What was such a word for you that supported you in these tough times? And what is the story behind?
Hmm. Certainly, ikigai has been a propelling force in my life, and something that helps me to remember the in between. Every moment can be a chance to express our purpose, our meaning, our passions. So if I have a reason to get up in the morning and go do something, that's my ikigai. That's the energy that I'm using in each moment. So I feel that it's more than just life purpose, and what some people want to include it in as a way of build. Well, you can use it for team building. You can use it for purpose finding in an organization, or for understanding your corporate culture. You can use it for understanding your innovation capacity, your creative, where your creativity lies, the diversity in your group when you do an ikigai as a part of your kind of team building, or your visioning. So it can be used in many ways. But for me personally, the story behind it, as I have already mentioned, is that I feel very passionate about conveying this topic, especially in this time when a lot of us are feeling, we are in this in between space. But if I take a Japanese sense, we've talked about ma and ba and wa. The in between part of it is what's beautiful, and what can be definitely tapped into or optimized to bring us to something else. This isn't a dead couple of years, or a down couple of years. For many of us, it's been a moment of flourishing, actually. Ikigai, if you take it down to the level of what the kanji, the Chinese characters mean, iki means to live, and gai is meaning or purpose. And some I saw this phenomenon kind of catch on in the general mainstream of looking at self-help and self-improvement, and I'm like, wait a minute, these people don't have the Japanese context for this. Let me study this and find out more about where does this come from. is this something that's every day for most Japanese? And how is it beneficial in a worldwide sense, and all, but coming from the Japanese context from which it springs? What they did was to study different population groups that seem to have a proclivity towards long life, and they found that among these populations there was one outside of Osaka and another one in Okinawa, the island part of Japan. And of course there are good living and health factors, food and activities that you love to do, but there was this underlying theme of ikigai, which is having a reason to get up in the morning, a sense of purpose and purposefulness
Mm.
that may or may not have anything to do with your career, for example, but it may be just the passion for you that you have for something, and you
Yeah.
can get from day to day because you can express your underlying passion or your underlying purpose or meaning in some other way. And maybe your job is a means to having the free time to do that other thing, or maybe you're expressing your, if it's your fascination with storytelling, for example,
Mhm.
that you can you have found a beautiful way to bring that into your professional work and art into your professional work, which is, in a sense, what ikigai is really about. It comes from our heart and propels us forward. The way I use it for my coaching is there is a kind of a visualization of all of the different themes in your life, the things that you love, the things that you have skill sets at, the aspects of the world that you would, big problems you want to solve in the world, and what
Mm.
are all the things that you can get paid for, the things that you can be called to do as a volunteer leader or as a leader, or even for leading yourself. So putting these things together in a visual format, you can see that there are overlapping themes and there are overlapping pieces to it, but there are also things that don't overlap. It's like a disconnect. It's like,
Yeah.
what is my, central purpose may or may not have to do with these other things, and I need to really consider that. So it is a very useful tool and a way of looking at it. A lot of Japanese, if you were to interview people on the street and about what is your ikigai, they may not be able to articulate that. And it may be something very, kind of deep or uchi, kind of internal to them or private. They
Mm.
may look like a typical businessman, but at night they do Elvis Presley impersonations, or on their weekends they're off, parasailing or something completely different, or gardening is a very common one. I used to ask when I was teaching in Japan a long time ago, and I'd ask the students, what is your hobby? And a lot of people would say reading books, and they really meant it. It's like, my passion is to read. My passion is to watch TV. That they know that's what gets them from day to day.
Mm.
So every moment can be an expression of that ichigo ichie, right? That Diana was talking about in one of your previous podcasts. That every moment is a new chance
Yeah.
to change to make a decision to express my passion
Yeah.
or my
Mm.
meaning, my purpose. Ikigai and understanding our underlying purpose. And one of piece of my ikigai is always, always, always connectedness.
Mhm.
And I can stay connected with people like this in virtual ways. And in some cases, some friendships and relationships have just bloomed
Mm.
because I can text this person anytime, or I can, get on WhatsApp with them, or in
Yeah.
Japan they have Line, or every place has a different way of connecting that way. So I don't feel as distant because of having those connections. And I also, another thing that I started in the pandemic was Toastmasters, of all things, kind of coming back
Wow.
full circle to story listening. I joined a local Toastmasters group that's all virtual. It's only been, I have never met these people in person. And it's a group called Tell Me a Story. And I'm not there, well, I am there to hone my storytelling capabilities, of course, but I'm also there to hone my story listening.
Mm.
You have to listen with my full self, and I have to imagine how people are listening to me. And then sometimes we give evaluations or feedback to others, and you really have to listen. Or I'm the timer and I have to follow, listen, and also time them. So there's an important part of story listening that can happen when you're also telling a story and having people give you feedback and starting to include people. And sometimes we have impromptu stories. And So that has been a way for me to approach it differently. It's very structured. It's very, in my feeling, very American in its format. You are learning how to improve your skill at speaking, and by the way, your leadership and listening skills too.
Wow, a lot has happened. A lot has
Yeah.
happened in terms of, new possibilities, new discoveries, as you say,
Mm,
and also, yeah, new possibilities to look at
yeah.
the storytelling and story listening skills. Yeah,
Yeah, and let's always look at the in between,
yeah,
those moments that, the one moment at a time, and think about not just the boundary of this and that, but what is in that boundary,
yeah,
and how can we make better bridges
yeah.
rather than building big walls. And I think that's what we do naturally, where the world is very fluid, and there's a lot happening and a lot of places. Any moment is where we can jump in and show that kindness, show that connectedness for other people.
So thank you for sharing all your stories. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. So many Japanese words, because we know that whenever we are learning or even picking up just a couple of words from an unknown language, that the possibility that we perceive word through this new lens is really fantastic, and it changes a lot for us. I have learned a lot right now how we can actually access these possibilities to listen to, and we don't have words for this phenomena in other languages, so it's very, very enriching. Thank you very much, Sue.
Thank you very much. It's been such a pleasure.